Don't worry at all. So Pilar does have your slides, but it perhaps makes sense for you to upload them so you can manipulate them.
Sure, just I've got to deal with all the messages, my computer's sending.
Don't worry, that we're not, this is not to pressure you more, we're in good time.
All right.
Sally,
okay, well,
lovely
I've got
to have
them.
you. Mike, yay.
Yeah. I must have a video.
Sally, would you like to start with a few words when we start? To locate
I'm not at all prepared to.
Okay, no problem.
So let's let Rhonda.
There's some people we know are in their pajamas. I got out of my pajamas specially in honor of this. The whole idea is that this is not overly formal. So yeah. So Rhonda, you let us know when you all set. Let me.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much all set. How is the noise level here in the background?
It's fine. Well, I'll let you know if it's a problem. We can hear, but you're looking gorgeous.
I'll speak more closely.
Isn't it South African necklace there?
Yeah, Durban.
Party atmosphere.
Yeah, that's right. It was just, I'm supposed to be at the hub, so I can run from this to the meeting with the website people, followed by the comms team meeting. And there's just so much traffic. There's been an accident downtown, and I had to jump out of the taxi and run for Wi-Fi.
So that's a good note to start on, Rhonda. Thank you so much. And maybe before we start, because Mike is here, can you quickly tell us how you did in your amazing competition that we were all so proud of you?
We came 7th out of 8. We won 3 games. We lost 6, but we had a fine time.
Did you have an amazing amount of fun? Because that's actually all.
I had a lot of fun. And the games we lost, we were not steamrolled in. We weren't taken for mugs by anyone, so we were pretty happy.
Okay.
Next time,
and you come back alive, which is important.
Exactly. I mean, it's something for people of our age just to have got through with the whole team still being able to run by the end of the 5th day.
Exactly. You are an inspiration. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending, and particularly to Rhonda. I know it's a completely insane week, so I wanted to say a huge thank you to you. So as you all know, we're really upping our game around monitoring and evaluation and impact. And there was a fantastic meeting, if the minutes are anything to go by, in Rome, that a group within WeGo really rethought these, or kind of thought how we should re-strategize around this set of issues. So we're going to do our standard format. I'm going to try and stick very strictly to the hour so that people know that when they come to these, we don't go over. And the format is about half an hour for you, as much time as you need, Rhonda. The timing for us is very important because we're all thinking about our reports. So if you need a bit more, please take it. And then it's a standard format. So just please indicate in the chat room afterwards if you want to ask a question. And yeah, the format's relaxed. Nothing's to any points of clarification. Nothing. No, please don't feel that inhibited in any way. So yeah, over to you. And I'll turn my video off. And but message me if there's any issues as we go. So Rhonda, could you just share your screen?
I will, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully you can see everything okay. You should be seeing the slides. Are you able to see the slides?
Yes.
We're able to see the slides. If you could speak into the microphone, it would help.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better? Okay,
That's great.
Okay, so, the general topic today, we're talking about impact. And I wanted to use the opportunity to talk about impact generally and some of the current thinking we've been doing as an organization around measuring our impact, and then share with you also some ideas around tools for doing that. So essentially, and I think everyone knows this at some level, but impact is really all about change. And change, as we know, can be positive, but it can also be negative. It can be changes that we intended to have happen, but there can also be changes we didn't mean to have happen, so unintended impact. And both the intended and unintended can be positive and negative. And then there's direct impact, something that when we do an activity, it's the direct result coming out of that activity. But then there can also be indirect impact. So, and people often in the M&E field, you might hear the words contribution and attribution, and that's the place where those fit. And when you're talking about impact evaluation, you're basically looking for the cause of the observed changes, right? So once you know what the changes are, then you're trying to work back and understand what got us to those changes. How did those changes happen? And so why does this matter? I mean, it matters for us in a couple of different ways. And the first one is learning around our own strategy. So our primary purpose when we're thinking about monitoring, learning, and evaluation is understanding our own work better. So how do we improve the work that we do to empower informal workers and secure informal livelihoods? There is a push on this at the level of the WeGo board. And that started, I think the conversation started in the 2017-2018 fiscal year, so with the previous board. And they were giving us two messages. And one was that, look, we can't cope as a board with the volume of information that you're bringing us that is around activities. So we would go in and we would report, and we'd be very proud. Everyone would want to say everything they'd done and mention all the team members by name and all the things the team members had done, and and they just could not cope. And they need us to be giving them information that's at a strategic overview level. So that's related to impact, because their other question is around how are we understanding the impact that we're having? And they see our sustainability as an organization, and the senior management team also, myself, and Sally and Mike, understand that our sustainability as an organization is tied to our ability to be able to communicate and convince others about our impact. So that's the first thing. It's around understanding our strategy for ourselves, learning, getting better, but there is a push at the board level on this front. The second reason really is an external reason, and it does have to do with the donors. And the first one, I would even frame this as a moral imperative. We are spending other people's money, and so we have an obligation to be effective in how we do that. And sometimes it's private money, Ford Foundation money, Hewlett Foundation money, Open Society. But, the fact that it's George Soros's money doesn't change anything. There's still an obligation to spend it in effective and efficient ways. But I think even more so when we're essentially spending citizen money. So in the case of, for example, Swedish SIDA or DFID in the UK, we're spending the money of British citizens and Swedish citizens. And in the case of Britain, they don't have enough right now. They're really struggling. So Mike can speak to the problems in the NHS. Self-created, but, nonetheless. But, not to be too flippant about it, I think there is an important point to be made around accountability. So there is definitely a conversation in the North around accountability for overseas development assistance. So, what are you spending our money on? Is it wasteful? Is there fraud? And we've heard recently in the UK with the Oxfam scandal, around concerns around safeguarding and so on. So there's definitely a conversation in the public eye around accountability for the money that's being given out to NGOs. And I think there's also an important internal driver, and that is around our sustainability. Excuse me, I've got to. Sorry, dry throat. So it's about knowing our impact, but it's also about communicating our impact. So once we know how we've been effective, what we've achieved, why we were able to achieve it, and that informs, in turn, our program strategy, then we also need to be able to communicate it. And, the world has changed in terms of how you need to be able to communicate things in crisp and compelling ways with increasing amounts of communication just, it's really all online now. The days of someone picking up a physical document are pretty much going the way of the dodo. So that has some implications for how we communicate as well. So I wanted just to give everyone an update coming out of the Rome meeting and even a little beyond that in terms of where we are right now with MLE. I'm using this term, monitoring, learning, and evaluation, or MLE, because we've used it before. I think we started using it around the time of the Gates Foundation projects, Inclusive Cities. So I'm continuing to use that. So in Rome, essentially what this was a small meeting that we attached to the WeGo board meeting that was happening in Rome. The program directors were going to be there anyway, and we just a small amount of money from the Open Society Foundations attached to our core funding. And so we tried to get a mix of people in the room who had some background and training in different methodologies, so different methodological approaches. So sociologists and anthropologists and people familiar with ethnography tools and approaches, and then also we wanted to mix in among that some folks who had really deep local experience, and some folks who had historically kind of internally been asking some really good fundamental questions and queries around monitoring, learning, and evaluation. So we couldn't have everyone, and we definitely felt, that back in the meeting, but we were able to have a small meeting to kick it off. And I say kickoff because it really is the start of a full year process. It may not take us an entire year, but it very well might. And our intent is to define a comprehensive WeGo-wide framework so that we all understand in the same way how we're approaching monitoring, learning, and evaluation. And that's going to include, once we decide how we're going to approach it, then we may have to revise and or design systems and processes to support it. So, it's at some level, this is all about what data do we have to inform our understanding of our impact. And so figuring all of that out is going to be important. So Sally has posted information about the meeting, including supporting documents. There's a short form. It's 3 quick pages. And then there's a long one that pretty much has a verbatim reporting of the conversations and all of the supporting documents up on the intranet. You want to go to the library and then monitoring, learning, and evaluation. You'll also find some other things in that section of the library, background materials on different methodologies you might find interesting, documents on previous evaluations that have been done at and for WeGo. This meeting and the process leading into it was supported by 2 consultants. Jody Nelson is an evaluation consultant. She used to work at the Gates Foundation, at the International Rescue Committee, and she's done her advanced studies, her PhD in political science, but really has gone deep into questions around evaluation. And she was recommended to us while she was between jobs. She was recommended to us by Bruce Levine. So after a conversation with her, we decided to snatch her up. She did some interviews. Many of you will have been interviewed. And really the intent was to have an initial report that could inform some discussion. So again, that report is up in the intranet, and go have a look. And some of you will recognize Barb Klugman's name. Barbara did an evaluation with WeGo back in 2009 and another one in 2014. And these were external evaluations required for Swedish CETA. And so she knows us well, and she facilitated the meeting. So I just want to run through some of the takeaways here. Apology for all the text on this slide, but I'll just make a couple of quick points around it. So I think for those of us in the meeting in Rome, really the first understanding we all came to as a group is that everyone is always doing MLE in the course of your regular work, because we're always you know, we do something and we assess and we see, oh, that didn't go very well. I think I'll change that next time. Oh, I've just had a meeting. I've learned something new. I'm going to adjust my approach. So we're doing that all the time. The challenge for us is to systematize it so that what one colleague knows, the other colleagues can also know. And we can do some overview analysis, and we can share information and share the learning and really have it inform our strategy and the renewal of our strategies at a WeGo-wide level. We definitely need to be increasing the team's knowledge on MLE so that we're all speaking the same language and we understand the basic principles and the methods. And I don't mean that to mean that every single person in WeGo has to become an MLE expert, but just that within each team, there's a kind of vested amount of knowledge that people can feel supported around. So we are already acting on that actually around some training that's happening in South Africa. We do need to streamline. Part of an exercise we did in Rome was to look at all the different ways we currently report information in and gather data, information. And we want to streamline that so that we're not making extra work for ourselves and we can be consistent with things, deliberate, more reflective, but be systematic about how we're collecting and analyzing information and also how we're sharing it back. So there was also a point there about, you know, the need for once something is understood at a strategy level and at an impact level to feed it back to the team. Jody Nelson was always coming back to remind us about the need to start with purpose. So why do we need to collect this information? How will it be used in the immediate term so that we don't get in the trap of collecting too much information because we think it might eventually be interesting. And in fact, we overburden ourselves with systems and processes that in the end won't work because people won't have time to do them or they'll be too expensive or whatever. And that was something that Barb Klugman also emphasized around just simplicity. You know, but if we are saying that MLE is something everyone does, then we need to make sure that people have adequate time to do it, to collect the information, to be submitting the finding time to complete the processes that go into it, but also time to reflect. I just saw an email this morning from Lucia about an outcome coming out of much earlier work, in fact, a decade ago. You know, she was pointing out that actually we intended to, someone externally wrote up our work with waste pickers that led to the Global Alliance. And it was something we intended to do. We wanted to do that learning. And of course, if we are always so darn busy, then we don't have the time to stop and reflect. And that really is something I think that the management team is taking on board in terms of pushing for prioritization in order to get to work that is really doable so that nobody burns out, but also time for reflection. That needs to become more of an imperative. It's all tied up into kind of language around, you know, how do you become a learning organization? We'd like to think that we are maybe, but also how do we unpack that and think about what it means and what it means for us and how we do it. We did discuss briefly, reframing the opportunity of the team retreat for maximum learning. And again, rather than just reporting on activity. So thinking about how we might do that, you know, could we have a webinar in advance where we share all the activities or, you know, share information in advance in a way that people can take it in and already have that information when they are heading into the team retreat, and then the team retreat agenda being restructured, both to allow for more time. So we're going to a 4-day retreat this year, or at least 3.5. And then an agenda that supports learning. We did some work on theory of change and are trying to articulate that in different ways. And it really was a learning exercise. But we realized coming out of that actually each program really needs to articulate their programmatic theory of change. So we have the WeGo theory of change. In fact, I had it with me yesterday. I was going through with some work with the comms team on this. And each program really needs to understand how their specific areas of work, what the theory of change is within their own program. And we'd like to have that work done before the team retreat so that at the team retreat we can talk about that all together. We talked about having guiding questions for the sector and regional calls, since that's a space where we are all coming together in various different groupings, or groups of us are coming together, and those are recorded and so on. And then I think just the overall point was about raising our view up from activities to outcomes, to the results, to the changes that are happening as a result of our activities. So these are the next steps now coming out of Rome. Some of this is a little dependent on the confirmation of a grant, which I'll speak to. We do want to invest a little bit in some increased knowledge on monitoring, learning, evaluation within program teams. And so there's a group of folks, sort of mostly South African-based folks, and then a couple of extras going to some training in Joburg end of July that Barb Klugman is doing on evaluating complex work that happens in the context of complexity, and notably policy advocacy, but then going into detail on outcome harvesting as a methodology, particularly. We need to work with all of the programs to be doing the work of articulating your theory of change before the team retreat. So again, we can review them all together at the team retreat. So that's something we've begun conversations with different teams about, when could this possibly happen. We revised our reporting. You'll have seen, hopefully now, the reporting did go out last week from Sally to the program directors. So if you don't have it from your program director, you need to reach out to them. And revised it to emphasize outcomes. We're still asking for activity level information because we need to report on some of that. But we just shifted up the emphasis and looked at outcomes and key strategic learnings, really. When that reporting comes in, it is going to be processed. So it is, we're going to pull everyone's information together and look at analyzing it as a group and sharing the learning back into the team retreat for everyone to chew on, what the teams are saying the key points are. I mentioned a grant. The Hewlett Foundation has an opportunity for their grantees to apply for small grants on organizational effectiveness. So we have applied for one. We're waiting to hear. Everyone knock some wood for luck. And that would include adding a full day to the team retreat that is all about MLE. So that's where we would talk about the theories of change, rather, at the program level. We would do some more work on understanding outcomes and that kind of thing. We are going to do some work, and Barb Klugman is the person who will be continuing to work with on this in terms of refining and confirming the systems and processes. So, once we come to an understanding of that WeGo-wide approach, what are the systems and processes that can lead into it? And again, she's someone that really focuses on simple processes that work, and to the greatest extent possible, processes that already exist that just gets to them, or become more consistent, or, get recorded and filed in different ways or used in different ways. But we are also going to create a basic MLE methods toolkit. So, I've mentioned and we've used different methods over the years, but I think it's important for folks in the program teams to understand, when you would choose certain methods to answer what kinds of questions when, So we're going to do a methods toolkit that's going to be kind of very, very, again, basic, simple, and also a webinar-based series of trainings so everyone can have a certain level of understanding. I think there will probably always be a need to kind of, bring in external consultants from time to time to support this, but it's helpful for the program teams and the team overall to be able to know enough to be able to engage in conversations with consultants around the proper strategies, right? The proper methods. And then we're going to explore a couple of methodologies. The first one is impact stories. I'm not sure if any of you have seen recently, Sophia and I did some work with StreetNet on identifying impact stories. So this is obviously a story-based understanding of impact. It's distinct from a case study. It is not a case study. I just want to be clear about that. It's a story for a particular purpose. And Barbara will be helping us do the terms of reference for all that, and we'll be learning from folks like ActionAid, who have had, I think they call their methodology stories of change. So, there are others out in the world testing out methodologies, and we want to learn from them as well. But the other methodology that we have already worked with at WeGo is outcome harvesting, or I should say some of us have worked with at WeGo. It's outcome harvesting. We're going to continue to just deepen our understanding of what that means for us, and keep using it. Barbara is going to support us again on that. There's a particular reason we've chosen that, and in part it's because we've had some prior experience. So I can see chat comments. I'm just going to pause. Caroline, I can't read the chat. Can you see if there's anything I need?
No, there's nothing
address?
you need to address at the moment.
Right.
It was just that Sophia was sharing StreetNet's impact stories. So
fabulous. Thank you, Sophia. And in fact, we should probably let's put them on the intranet in the evaluation space as well. All right, so that's that. If you want to know kind of why these things, it's the things that we had in front of us at the time, and the things that we could make fit into a Hewlett organizing or organizational effectiveness grant. The other thing that is in that grant is unrelated. Well, I mean, somewhat related, but largely unrelated to, indirectly related to monitoring, learning, evaluation, and that is an integrated database, internal database. So it's a grant that holds a couple of things, MLE being one of them. So I just, I think the initial framing of this webinar was more around tools and approaches, so I didn't want to leave that hanging. So, and I do want to talk a little bit more about outcomes. So this is something, and I've shared in the documents on the intranet for today's webinar. There's a file folder called Rhonda's documents or presentation documents or something, and there's a paper in there that's just a 3-page summary of this matrix, because obviously just looking at it on the screen, it's kind of hard to take in. But essentially what it says, it's called the Stacy matrix, and you can see the two lines here are close to agreement and far from agreement in terms of what's happening in the world, and parties needing to come to agreement on an area of work. And then the second arm is closely and far from certainty. So how certain is the outcome and how uncertain is the outcome. And so he's got different zones, and I won't go into all of them, but there's sort of a political zone and a technical zone and a judgment zone. And then, zone 4 out on the end is known as the zone of chaos or the zone of anarchy. And it's either total disorder or people tend to avoid it. But this highlighted section in the middle, zone number 5, is what's known as the zone of complexity. And so it's a way of thinking about strategy. What are the appropriate strategies for doing complex work in complex systems? When the certainty isn't there and the agreement isn't there And, you know, we would kind of probably refer to this as the zone of struggle, right? But you can see some of the things that are listed here. And sorry, garbage can decision making is not to suggest that all your decision making is garbage. It's actually a name of a theory around decision making in this zone. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of different methodologies, several of which are not, you know, they're not here, but it's essentially a space of innovation. You're trying to, you're constantly learning and testing. Does this work? Okay, what about that? If we adjust here, where does that get us? And you can see I've highlighted the section here. It's unprogrammable decision-making focused on outcomes rather than solutions. So you're trying, you have an idea of what you think you can achieve, but then what's critical is the learning and how you adjust once you see what you have achieved, the results and the changes that have happened, and then you adjust accordingly. So I just wanted to share that. As I say, there's some more information. You're welcome to go deep, and but if you're going to be going to the Google sphere on this, you want to Google Stacy matrix, and it's known as complexity theory in management theory. So let's talk a little bit about outcome harvesting, because actually outcome harvesting is a tool, a monitoring, learning, and evaluation tool that responds really well to the challenges of life in the complexity zone. And this is, I've also put up in the folder there this morning a sheet from Barb Klugman with definitions for you. So she notes that outcome harvesting is the identification, formulation, analysis, and interpretation of outcomes to answer usable questions. So it is an actively defined methodology. It was developed by Ricardo Wilson Grau. There's actually an entire textbook on it now. It just came out the end of 2018, and I have a copy if anyone's interested, but there's a lot of material online because, and Barb Klugman was actually involved with Wilson Grau in the development of outcome harvesting methodology when she was at the Ford Foundation. And she's an expert in it now, and working with people. It has really gotten a lot of, I think it's getting increasing amounts of take-up. I've noted, recently I saw that even USAID is starting to experiment with it, which I find hilarious. Because they're not, you know, it's not something they would normally be known for. So this definition, I think, is important because it's important to understand that outcome harvesting as a methodology has different stages. So what I'm going to talk about next is really around the identification and formulation of outcomes, but there is a step that has to do with, you know, you verify the outcomes, then you analyze them, you categorize them and analyze them, and then you have strategy conversations that are conversations of people with informed judgment and experience, based on experience, to interpret the outcomes. And again, it's around usable questions, right? We don't do this just for the heck of it. We use it to inform the improvement of our work. So what are outcomes? Some people will be more familiar with this than others, but essentially it's all about change. So this is where I started in the beginning. It's all about changes that others make that are influenced directly or indirectly by our activities. So yesterday in the comms meeting, you know, we were talking a lot about fact these are changes others make. So what's important there is that for the most part, these are going to be external changes. So, you know, in comms, someone was talking about, okay, but I helped my colleague do something. That's not the kind of change we're looking at here, right? So we're talking about changes in the external world that others make that are influenced directly or indirectly by our activities. And so here you can see the rise up from activities to the outcome level. I just wanted to make a point about these being observable, verifiable changes. They need to be specific. So yesterday, again, when we were doing this work in the comms team, we had a suggested outcome that was around, some MBOs did something. That's not sufficient as an outcome. You need to be able to get specific, and you need to know how do we know that some MBOs did this? Did they tell us? Did we see it? Is it documented somewhere? And so on. So again, in Barbara's handout, you'll have more information, but when you're watching for outcomes and when you're writing outcomes, and right now writing outcomes for your reporting, you want to frame them in a way that that says when they happened. So this could be something like, for example, during the Commission on the Status of Women in New York, for example, or you could say in November 2018, but you definitely want to have the when. You want to say where, and you want to be specific. So it could be in Johannesburg, be in this neighborhood in Johannesburg. If you've got that information, you might not always have it. It could be on Twitter. It could be in this journal. It could be during this seminar, right? And then you would name, where the seminar happened. In Oslo at this seminar title, right? So again, it's looking for specificity. And then for who. So specific actors, you want to say so again, not the some MBOs or a group of urban planners or that kind of thing. You want to be as specific as possible. And then change. All of this revolves around change. So you're looking for the elements of change. And, change doesn't have to be wholesale, maybe wholesale systems change. So you're looking for changes in behavior, relationships, activities, actions. Could be policies, regulations, laws. And I added this last one, again, coming out of the comms meeting this week. Changes in messaging. So for example, the head of UN Women, Joanne sent this through, the head of UN Women, it has now taken on WeGo language, and we actually observed that happening in a presentation, panel presentation that Laura gave in New York. And now we can continue to see her online using that language that she began to adopt in that seminar. So again, observable, verifiable, but specific. So you're really looking for what changed, who changed it, and then the specifics, okay? So we're really asking everyone at WeGo to become outcomes detectives and to watch for them all the time. Watch for them when you're talking to MBOs, when you're talking to researchers, when you're whoever you're talking to, really, in the external world. So we'd like people to get in the habit of taking quick notes in the moment. I mean, Miguel was thinking yesterday about some of his work, and that facilitated conversations between two people who were in conflict at StreetNet because he was able to translate. And he said, I do that a lot, but I don't ever take note of it. So now we're looking for people to really take note of it. And you can take note of it, by actually writing a note in ye olde notebook. But you can also take a photo and send a photo with a caption, get somebody on video on your phone for a minute, ask them a question about, tell me again that thing you just said about what you did when you left the workshop. There might be things, you might be on WhatsApp groups where people are sharing and so on. So you can screenshot things and then we'd like all of these things to be sent to the email that some of us will be aware of, but not everyone, because we want to be using this consistently. So the email is impact@wego.org, and we're looking for people to pick it up and start using it all the time and use it consistently. And then we will go in periodically and collect these, reach out for any clarification or verification, and look at how to categorize and bring that into some of the analysis that we do. So this is really, I think, my final thing to say. None of this is a test. Nobody is trying to catch you out on whether or not your work is effective. We know that we've got a team of smart and committed and experienced people here. It's not about trying to prove that you're productive. We know all that. We're yeah, we know all that. So it's none of this is trying to validate your existence, and people shouldn't take it that way. What we want to do is to be able to have the important strategic learning conversations for ourselves so that we can better understand our own strategic choices and how we can improve our work over time. So it just all goes back to empowering informal workers and securing informal livelihoods. And I mean that in terms of reducing some of the pressure that I know my colleagues will put on themselves around this, but also, yesterday in the comms meeting, it's not about us. Like, we don't have to see our work in every outcome, and we won't be able to see our work often, some of us more than others. Some people will be able to see their work immediately. They'll do a workshop, workers will act. Others of us are in long-term processes. And so, again, the outcome that Lucia shared this morning is based on work that happened 10 years ago. So, so I say all of this just to relieve the pressure and to allow people to understand that change takes time, and we will be tracking these outcomes over time. So if you do the work this year, but the outcome doesn't reflect in this year, that's okay, because 3 years from now, it'll show up. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So Caroline, I could stop sharing now and take any questions or conversation.
Rhonda, fantastic. Thank you so much. I love this idea of life in the complexity zone. It captures very much, I think, what a lot of us feel. So just to stick to our normal format, any points of clarity, any issues, this is your moment. So if you just identify yourself in the chat function, we'll take it from there. Are there any questions? You've wowed us, clearly. Well, people are thinking. I'll just, I can't see anyone yet. I mean, I think it'll come out in the wash, but one of the things just in trying to think through my own outcomes, kind of struggling a little bit with the level of outcomes. So, or in terms of like a micro versus macro. So there's some like moments where we all jump out of our chair, and they perhaps happen once every 3 years, where you're like, wow, my work had impact. And then there's a whole myriad of little outcomes where you think, oh, that's so arbitrary. I don't think I can, it sounds stupid to even mention it. So I think maybe in the process of this, we'll get a sense of, when we've shared our outcomes, of what level we're talking about, whether we should be expansive or whether we should be limiting it to medium range and big outcomes. Yes, let me just see if there's anyone else.
Caroline, I would say on that came up yesterday as well with the comms team. And, I would say that, well, you know what, it would be helpful to me if you would give me an example of the more kind of minute level outcome that you're meaning.
Okay, so sorry, I did, there are some comments in the chat, the group chat. So let me give you an example. So I was just thinking, I was at an inequalities conference, and there was a whole kind of online set of questions about solutions. And the one that came out of our group breakout session about the informal economy, was listed as the #1 kind of way forward. And there was a lot of policymakers in the room. So I was just looking at my timesheet thinking, oh, that was an interesting moment, but it's such a micro example. So that.
Well, let me tell you why the micro examples are important. So the process of outcome harvesting is to harvest them all, including at this micro level, and then to categorize them and to do some analysis based on the categorizing. So you may look at that and say, well, that's a small thing. But actually, if we looked at our outcomes over 1 year, other people may have several of these small things. And so there may be learning around these small things that's really valuable for us to reflect on. And we don't know that if people kind of self-censor around, oh, that's not important enough. So I think any point of change, it has to be a point of change. So if you went into that room and people were already fully on board with the informal economy and WeGo's messaging, then that's not a change. But if you go into that room and they're not, and then the outcome of that meeting is they are, then the who is the group of people who were in that meeting, and you could specify them. And the change is that they took on board WeGo's messaging in the following way, and, you know, committed to further action. Obviously, we'd eventually want to be looking for the further action, but that's, you know, that's the outcome for another year. It might never happen, and that's fine. But if we don't capture these micro outcomes, then we're not going to be able to have a conversation globally where we say, whoa, 10% of our outcomes this year were related to, you know, small changes where we were in the room with a small group of professionals in the field and we changed their minds. So I think it's important. I think we have to collect even what you term.
And methodologically, maybe the smaller level outcomes to be reflected to the impact email, and the bigger ones in our kind of annual report. Would that be kind of methodologically?
No, everything goes to go.org. I see Mike Bird has is there anything different asking people to do as from now? And the answer to that is yes. So about becoming an outcome detective. So we want everyone to begin to watch for outcomes. We want all of those outcomes, big or small, to be sent to impact@wego.org and to then be captured in your reporting. So Laura, for example, talked about, she's one of the people that uses impact@wego.org. And when she goes to do her reporting, she goes to her email and puts impact@wego.org in the search bar under the sent file, and she can see everything. She's got them already listed. So we're asking people to use impact@wego.org and to be watching for outcomes and to be sending them there in that framing way, and then of course to be doing the reporting in the format that was sent. So those are the current things that we're asking people to do. A smaller group of people have been asked to also please participate in some training, and so that's someone in each program.
So nobody's asking questions, so I'm just going to abuse my role as chair. Please raise your hand or put anything in if you. So, I mean, one of my curiosities, and I think it's a real strength of WeGo across the board, is around publications. So if we take the case of particularly academic publications, which often don't have an immediate impact, but certainly it's kind of part of WeGo's project about long-term change. So, the hope is that it gets prescribed in curricula, that it kind of leads to bigger discourse change. So I think we've got, so is there a method as WeGo writ large that we can use in terms of checking citations? But then there's a lovely follow on of saying it's one thing when a big, somebody cites us, but what about like understanding what they actually do when they, how does one methodologically get to that?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you an opinion first. I don't believe in the search for the perfect methodology. I think that, we're going to have to use our judgment and think it through, but it's never going to be perfect. And there are different ways that we can capture different things. So for example, yesterday, Kendra was reflecting on being told on Twitter that, thanks for sharing this resource. I'm going to use it now as part of the curriculum in my women's studies course at George Washington University. And so there will be ways that we pick that up. And citation analysis certainly is a way to do it. We have to find a way to think about research, journal articles from the point of view of change. So if our research colleagues will know this, right? There are researchers already writing on the informal economy with a perspective on the informal economy, and them writing yet another article from their perspective is not change. But then there will be journals who don't normally cover the informal economy who cover the informal economy. There will be researchers who don't normally who do it. There will be new research in new places and so on. So you're looking for the point of change. And so some citations will be therefore more meaningful than others, and that is a judgment call. And that will never be perfect, and we will never capture them all. And that's, I guess, that is the response that I also have from Marlies in the chat, who says, she just wants clarity on the last point. Sally said in the report not to write down everything, but just the main outcomes. Yes, we want you to focus on the main outcomes, but that's in the report. But throughout the year, when you see a point of change, when you see an outcome, we want you to send it to impact@wego.org. We know we're not going to capture them all. It's not our intent to capture, it's not our intent, because it is impossible to capture all of our outcomes. It's impossible. So we're going to do our best to capture most of the outcomes, and we do want them sent to impact@wego.org, and you should be capturing the main outcomes in your annual reporting.
Sorry, just the intention is not just to write down your questions. Please feel free to speak. So Anna, I see you've got a question. Can you just outline it to us?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Caroline. Thank you, Rhonda, for a fantastic presentation. I think I just wanted to clarify, as we work on the new template, and as someone who participated in the Rome meeting, that some of our projects or engagements with workers or research projects, whatnot, will hit multiple levels of outcomes. And I just want to be sure that we can capture the complexity of what's happening at the MBO level, at the research level, at the relationship level. So if there's room for us to just play a bit around with how we're categorizing this, but linking it to Barbara Klugman's outcomes, the 7 outcomes that she gave us, I think that would be really important, so that we don't lose all of these different levels of outcomes. So that's one question. And I think the second one would...
Take this one?
Sure.
Can you take this one? So the short answer to that is yes. The thing about outcomes is that you do want to capture the different levels. We don't know what is meaningful in the capturing process. We only know what's meaningful in the analysis. Do you know what I mean? So if you try to just disregard and, as I say, sort of self-censor around what's important, and we're going to end up potentially missing important nuances and complexities that you're mentioning. So I think people should feel free to capture what they feel needs to be captured, keeping in mind the definition, right? So we will do work on this as the reports come in. If we're getting things that are not outcomes, that's fine. We won't move that further into the next part of the process, which has to do with categorizing and analyzing and so on. So as long as they're outcomes, then yes, you should feel free to capture the levels that you think you need.
Any further questions? Sonia.
Hi.
Hi. I think you might have misjudged the time.
Yeah, for some strange reason, I'm not getting the link to the webinar. I got for the previous, but I didn't get for this one. And when I realized it, it was too late. So apologies.
No problem at all. You can listen to the end, last few questions. You were at the Rome meeting, so I think you'll have covered some of this ground, and you can watch it. So anyone else have any further issues or questions?
Anna had 2 questions. So
Anna, sorry, your second question. Sorry, Anna.
It's just if we can have access to the documents Barbara Klugman will share in the next round of training with the Joburg team members. If there's any way we can get access to some of the texts?
Yeah, we can ask. I'm sure she'd be happy to share them. She said she was wondering about using WeGo as a case study, so we might find ourselves reflected there.
Okay, thank you.
Well, people are thinking. I mean, it is just, we are so upping our game. It really is lovely. It's so lovely to see this kind of thought through so carefully. And yeah, so thanks to everyone who's put so much effort into it. Are there any final points of clarity? I've got 2 systems going at the moment. Mike, Sally, anything you want to add? I think if...
Not for me, I don't think. Thanks, Rhonda.
So maybe just to end off, if there's no further issues, and Anna, is all your ground covered?
Yes.
Then I think we can end off. And just to say a big thank you to Rhonda. I did steamroller you into this date. I know how incredibly busy you are, but it really is fantastic because all of us are thinking about these issues.
Yeah, I think the timing is really good, Caroline. So thanks for that. And I just want to encourage people to reach out. Like as you're working on your reports, if you have any questions or you want to just get on Skype and talk through how to formulate outcomes or anything like that, just reach out.
And certainly just to also say that it would be lovely for the webinar series to support this process. So whenever it makes sense from the ops team side to have a reflective moment about outcomes, just to please to use the webinar series. Also, so I just wanted to advertise some webinars coming up. So we have our next one on the 20th of June is about knowledge co-production. So it's really about WeGo. So Anna and Jenna have kindly agreed to reflect on a really lovely paper that I read yesterday that is being published in an edited volume, which is really looking at our approach to co-production and knowledge production. And I think it's really about us taking that space and having also an internal process of reflection of how we generate knowledge. And so thank you very much to the 2 of them. That's on the 20th of June. We are hoping to squeeze in another one, perhaps before that, if Sonia is willing, around dump closures. So certainly what's been bubbling up from the focal cities a lot is a need to have more information about dump closures. We know that Sonia is the global expert on this issue and a kind of livelihood-centered approach to this. So the idea is to have them a little bit more frequently than once a month. So we watch this space. And again, if there's any feedback about how the webinars are working, any ways to improve them, if you're happy to have more regular ones. I know the turnout is not always perfect, but people are watching them online afterwards. So don't be discouraged if there's not as many people as we hope. It is a system that's working. So thanks to everybody and particularly to Rhonda and you. If I was there, I'd be buying you a cup of coffee or some breakfast to say thank you very much.
Okay, I'm headed over to the hub where the coffee is free and flows freely and is free. So.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, and see you in a few weeks' time.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.